Yes, people. It's Jacob on the one up top. As per usual, reporting on Tottenham's games of the weekend. So before I say anything, make sure you like, share, subscribe, do all of that. Help the channel grow. I'm just going to get straight into it, man. Tottenham have been humbled at home. Tottenham 0, Bournemouth 1. Now, for anybody that didn't watch the game, or anybody that just saw the score or whatever, you'd think that it was a smash and grab. Not by any stretch of the means. Like, I'm not even joking, man. That should have been or could have been 5-0. Do you know what I mean? I'm not even exaggerating. That potentially could have been 3-0 at half time. Very easily. They weren't even flat at Bournemouth. They were, I'm going to give credit to the opposition first. They were brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Like, if I was a Bournemouth fan, on my way back down to the south coast after that, I'd be gassed. And to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if Bournemouth fans were slightly confident, because the last few games we've had against Bournemouth, granted it's been other managers we struggled with. And I was on a couple of podcasts this week, and I was saying to them that after the Burnley game, I was more confident that we'd get a result at Man City than we would do at with Bournemouth. And they were like, why? I said, because the teams that I feel, or most people feel, we should get a result at if we want to be successful, they're the teams that I'm worried about. So if you look at, the way we played against Burnley, the way we just played against Bournemouth, and then the way we played against Man City, people thought I was an idiot for making comments like that. But now you understand where I'm coming from. I believe that when we're playing them, we're the underdog. We'll get results. We'll end up playing, Man United at Old Trafford away, or it'd be Arsenal in a North London derby away, and somehow we'll get a result there because we'll revert to type. We'll go 3 at the back. And again, another thing I said is we should have gone 3 at the back with this game, and people were like, what, Bournemouth? I was like, yeah. Like, I remember we played them away last season, and it was literally carbon copy of this game. They won 1-0 at their ground, and that should have been 9-0. Granted, it was Ange, but it's the same group of players. So what I'm looking at, I'm not going to take anything from Bournemouth because Bournemouth played wicked. Thomas Frank will learn a few things about his players. He is obviously he's a coach, isn't he? He's a football coach. He's going to know a lot more about football than I do. But in games like this, I remember sitting there with my son going, like, if Semenyo's playing out wide on the left, you're better off putting Jed Spence out there because he can keep up with his pace, and having a doggy in, depending on how his fitness is, because Pedro Porro just can't cope when there's attackers that are quicker than him, because they pen him in and then he can't go forward and do what he does because he's a bit worried about what's going backwards. Semenyo had him on toast. But, Bournemouth all across the pitch. So Alex Scott was just winning everything in midfield. David Brooks, is a good battle between him and Jed Spence, but, he put a better account up for himself than anyone at Man City did against Jed Spence. The 2 at the back for Bournemouth were excellent. And they made Richarlison look terrible. Like, Richarlison had a stinker today, I'm going to be real. But because I know my football, I know as much as he had a stinker, Diakite, Semensi, I think his name is, they made him look stupid, honestly. Like, and to be honest, Areola made Thomas Frank look stupid. I think what it is Areola knew and watched us against Man City and thought, Tottenham are just going to try and beat the press and score goals that way. And Man City weren't ready for that. Whereas Bournemouth have watched us against Man City and thought, all right, if you're going to do that, we'll just press you out. We'll make sure that Richarlison don't win no flick-ons, Papsar don't win no flick-ons. Then what are you going to do? So they literally pressed us out, and we didn't know what to do. All we kept doing is punting it to Richarlison, who had a stinker. So I don't know if it's him having a bad game or the centre-half having a good game. I think it's a mixture of both. Again, they doubled up on Kudus. And even when they doubled up on Kudus, Pedro Porro was too scared to come forward because he knew that if we lost the ball, which we were doing 9 times out of 10, Semenyo was going to come in behind him. He can't catch him up for pace, can't match him for strength. Going to be another chance, and that was happening all game. One person again, splits the Spurs fans down the middle is Brennan Johnson. You know, he's one of those guys that really frustrates me because you'll be cussing him for half hour, but he goes and scores. So at Man City, I was like, what's this guy doing? Scores. You know, Europa League final, what's this guy doing? Scores. Now, don't get twisted, he's a brilliant goal scorer. But for me, if you're going to go into difficult games like Bournemouth and all he's going to do is score, you need 11 men digging in against Bournemouth, home or away. They're a good side. You know, people who just think, oh, Bournemouth, because they're a small club, to underestimate them. But they got some good players and they got a good coach. You know, but again, this is why when people were saying it's an 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 transfer window because we've got Xavi Simons, nah, it's a 7. We need another winger. You know, we haven't really replaced Son. Kudos is a good player, but you know, if we had, let's say you had Son at his pump on the other side of the pitch, all of a sudden they don't double up on Kudos, because if you double up on Kudos, there's space in the middle. You switch it out to the other flank, and if it's Son on form, we'll probably go and win this game. You know, we've got a team that you ain't really got to worry about anybody really going forward anyway. You know, if you get to the point where Kudos is subdued, which he was today, and you stop Richarlison from winning the flick-ons, where do you get the goals? Because Brennan Johnson doesn't score anything. He doesn't score goals from anything. He needs someone to set him up. You know, he'd have Kulusevski setting him up, Maddison setting him up. You know, that's the guy he is. He had Son setting him up, Solanke setting him up. So if you just give him the ball, you could see today he was misplacing simple passes to Jed Spence. He was putting in crosses that, you know, you might as well put me on the game because I could put them crosses in after a couple of beers. Like, let's be real. Like with Brennan Johnson, you might have well played me today because I would have done exactly what he did today, and everyone would have been like, who's this guy? Difference is, I'm watching Tottenham. This guy's getting paid a good wage, and he's in a positive way pulling the wool over our eyes, because I can't discredit him too tough because he scores goals. But you know, there's players that score goals and they weren't always starting. You know, look at Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. He's got 99 Premier League goals. He wasn't starting every year for Man United. He'd start some games. He'd start your Fulhams at homes. He'd start your Aston Villas at home. You wouldn't be starting games where it could be tricky and we need 11 men to dig in, because effectively Solskjaer scored goals. So then they'd bring in, you know, Dwight York, who might be able to hold it up. They'd bring Andy Cole, who would run in behind and all that stuff, which is some stuff that Solskjaer could do. But Solskjaer never started the big games. But he scored goals. You know what I mean? He scored 100 Premier League goals pretty much. That's a lot more than a lot of people. So Brennan Johnson's capable of scoring that many goals in his career. But if it's a Champions League final, do I want Brennan Johnson starting? It's a fine one, because you don't want him to start if you're up against it. But if you're on job, you can't do it because he's going to score. Do you know what I mean? He gets in the right positions. He does what Sterling did for Man City that time. Sterling was obviously a better player, but Sterling would always get in the back post and score. You know, and it was a good weapon for Man City when Pep and all these guys were at their pump. But you know, normally I'll say positives. The only positives I can say for Spurs was Mickey van de Ven was the only one who looked like he woke up this morning. Who else is there that I could say played well? Lucas Bergvall, in a way, came on and changed the game. But as you know, anybody, you know, I could have come on and changed that game. That's how bad we were. I could have come on and maybe put a tackle in, and the crowd would have gone mad because we were cheering little things. You know, I was sat in here with my son, and we was high fiving when Lucas Bergvall had a shot on target, because that was the first one we had. Do you know what I mean? But it's one of those, like, you know, again, I said it on a podcast, you know, Thomas Frank is going to have a honeymoon period. There's going to be a time where everyone's going to be like, oh, breath of fresh air, who needs Ange? But what we got to remember is we've still got a lot of players that Ange had. And when you look at a stat that came up from last season, we conceded the first goal 20 times last season, and we only went on to win like 3 games. We lost 15. So as much as we've got a new manager, new tactics, new stuff, mentally he's going to have to work on that and change it. And of course we're going to give him time. You know, I'm not going to sit here and throw Frank under the bus. What he's got to try and do though is instill a mentality that when we go 1-0 down, it ain't the worst, because it was pretty obvious that a lot of them players kind of thought that it was still in last season's programme. I mean, we went 1-0 down. Everybody lost hope, including the fans. You know, I used to sit there and watch Tottenham. I'll get a pint of beer, you know, a can of beer out of the fridge. 1-0 down after 10 minutes, like, my kids would come downstairs and catch me hoovering and like, Dad, you're not watching the game. I'm like, there's no point watching it, man, because we might equalise, but they'll probably make it 2-0 and we lose this game completely. But yeah, I'm not gonna, you know, hype up too much. You know, of course you're annoyed that you lost it, but you've always got to go back to what you were thinking previously. So if I'm going to be completely honest, when I looked at the fixtures coming up for the league, in the first 3 ones before the internationals, if someone's, you know, people ask me how many points would you take, and I was like, realistically 5, because I looked at Burnley and thought by hook or by crook you got to win that one. Man City away, I would have took a draw. Anybody would in their right mind at the Etihad. And then at Bournemouth, I know they give us trouble. So as much as I wouldn't have took a draw, I wouldn't be surprised if we got it. So the fact that I was expecting 5 points, we got 6. It's an extra point. And if I'm honest, we deserve to lose that game. If we played like we did against Man City and say Burnley to an extent, and we lost that game, I'd probably be on here shouting and screaming. But I don't see the point, because just because Bournemouth are a small club doesn't mean that you've got to disrespect them. They played superb today, and if I was a Bournemouth fan, like I say, I'd be going nuts, because if Tottenham played like that, it'd be brilliant. But if I'm going to do a small, I wouldn't say criticism, but an analysis on Thomas Frank, he's got to figure out a way of unlocking defences, because I think at the minute he's kind of understood that we can't play through the lines because we've got 3 dogs in midfield and we haven't got any number 10s at all. So, you know, with Xavi Simons coming in, you'd hope that ain't going to be the way to play, even if we go 1-0 down in our first game back. We need to figure out a way of playing football and do that if push comes to shove, rather than doing it from the off, or do it from time to time. You know, it worked against Man City because it caught them off. But like I say, we played better against Man City than we did at Burnley. Just because I feel we haven't got that creative, you know, midfielder apart from Kudus. You know, you stop Kudus, you stop Tottenham effectively. So, you know, if you stop Kudus and you stop the flick-ons right now for Tottenham, it's different. So my thing is, if you've got Kudus, if you've got the flick-ons, plus you're playing through the lines, that's when you've got a complete team. So, yeah, to be honest, we're going to the international break. It is what it is. You know, you're going to get Tottenham fans complaining. All of a sudden, they're going to remember, you know, Thomas Frank was at Brentford. All of a sudden, they're going to remember Kudus had a stinker last year at West Ham. But my thing is, you got to remember that Thomas Frank is coming into a group of players. They're not all these players. And he's, you know, it doesn't matter who the manager is. You're learning on the job. You know, you learn quite quickly that Pedro Porro against a physical winger ain't it. So, you know, for me, I was calling for Udogie to come on a lot earlier because Semenyo was just had him pinned back. And Udogie came on as well to do well, to be fair. So that's something for Thomas to think about. You know, if we've got these performances, say, next season and the season after, that's when, if you feel like it, you can criticise Thomas Frank to the moon. But my thing is, we've just got players that, whether they've got the winning mentality, might not be up to standard in certain games, and Thomas Frank can only learn from this. So we move forward, and yeah, come on you Spurs. Jacob on the one up top.